Welcome everyone to our first webinar. It's going to be presented by White Marble Marketing Managing Director Andrew Scott and his colleague Tabra Tracise, who's head of digital marketing. You may notice a slight accent on Tabra, and I'll leave you to guess where she may be from, but she may tell you about that. But they're going to do a high-level overview of websites and the website projects. They're going to look at the fundamentals of the website, content, etc. And it's something obviously I'm very passionate about. And as you can see from behind me in my woodland, we have which is an image from our website. Image is everything, and it's very important to show who you are and what you are. There'll be some basic do's and don'ts, and I'm sure they'll touch on that. But I'm going to pass over to Andrew first, and he will then introduce White Marble Marketing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Stuart. Hello all. So my name's Andrew Scott. I'm the MD at White Marble, as Stuart says. I mean, we're a marketing consultancy for wealth and asset management industry, both here in the UK and in the US. So we're headquartered in London, and we have folk in Boston and New York. And I guess we do the full breadth of marketing, for everything from sort of brand articulation through to client engagement, through to I'll say digital transformation, but we specialize in that vertical of wealth and asset management. I'll let Tabra introduce herself, but Tabra runs our digital team, and I guess we've got a lot of hard-earned experience helping firms either build brand new sites or improve, the sites that they've got already, and that experience comes from our time at White Marble or before. So I used to run digital at M&G Investments and what's now Federated Hermes, and Investec now 91 before that. So lots of experience across the team in working with investment firms. So over to you, Tabra.
Thanks, Andrew. Lovely to be here with you today. So as Andrew mentioned, I lead the digital team at White Marble, which means plenty of hands-on experience delivering website projects start to finish, and being involved at all levels of those types of projects. Prior to my time at White Marble, I was in-house at T. Rowe Price, and also worked in other industries as well. So I've got a background in telecommunications and insurance. So I've got some good insights from other verticals as well. So the plan today is I'm going to talk you through some of the sort of fundamentals that you should be thinking about if you're embarking on a website project. I think we would absolutely love it if you were to interrupt me at any point, ask questions, dive in with comments. If you have thoughts at any point, we very much encourage this not being sort of a formal lecture format, and more of a conversation with some inputs. I'll share my screen now and kind of talk you through some slides. They are hopefully visual enough to keep us all interested, but not so detailed that you'll be overwhelmed with loads of text. So the key topics that we're going to cover today, and like I said, stop me at any point, is start to finish, what does a website project actually look like and involve? What are the phases? What are the fundamentals that you need in place to launch a site? We're going to spend a bit of time talking about information architecture, because it is absolutely critical to a successful website. And then a handy list of some do's and don'ts that will undoubtedly encourage further discussion. Out of curiosity, of those on the call, is anyone currently in the midst of working on their website relaunch, or about to launch a site, anything like that?
This is Chris from Third Avenue. Our website is always under construction, so we just continuously make updates and try to keep our content fresh, in hopes that SEO will kick in and drive millions of people there.
Brilliant. I mean, I love that. If your business doesn't stay where it started, and your website shouldn't either. So, very much applaud that continuous optimization approach to websites. I'm going to put a little bit of a scary diagram in front of you now. which is something that we visualize to help set expectations around all of the different milestones and phases and deliverables involved in a website project. So it's a little bit scary to look at all those items. So you'll see, you know, when we work with clients, the top half calls out what we're doing, the bottom half calls out what the client is doing. This is a sort of standard single site project over the course of anywhere from 25 to 29 weeks, roughly, depending on, you know, launch date and post live requirements. But really what this slide is here to demonstrate is you shouldn't underestimate the work involved. It is incredibly challenging to launch a site off the side of your desk. So be prepared for kind of the time commitment that goes in, the decisions that you're going to have to kind of corral people to make. And I won't go through all of these in excruciating detail, so don't worry, we're not going to have this slide up for long. But a critical element of a website project is that there are a lot of dependencies. Until you have decided what pages are going to exist on your website, you cannot build your navigation menu because you don't know what pages you have yet. Until you know what pages you have in your website and how people will navigate to them, you can't start planning content for your site because you don't know where that content will sit on the site. You can't start building wireframes, i.e. layouts, or page designs and things like that. So everything has, you know, quite hard dependencies on the phase that came before it. And, you know, this is a standard website. Some website projects, depending on the technology used, the complexity of your business, they can go on a lot longer. So here's a more simple version of what the phases of a website project are that I thought we could touch on each of these. So discovery and IA is quite an important phase. And, you know, when people think of a website project, most people are thinking about page designs and code. And those are obviously incredibly important things. But the success behind websites, I firmly believe, sits in discovery and IA phase. So when people decide to launch a site, often everyone will hold certain assumptions and understandings of what the scope is, who we're talking to when we build this site, you know, who's going to be involved, what sign-off points there are, what the site will do, what it won't do, what it'll look like on the front end, what it'll look like on the back end. And so the discovery phase is a really important moment in which to collate all those assumptions, get them out into the light of day, and make sure that from the very beginning, everyone is on the same page. Otherwise, things can get pretty sticky a couple of months in when you realize everyone had been operating under different assumptions. Information architecture, we will touch on in a little bit more detail in today's call, but information architecture is all about how you structure information on your site. And that's critical because when someone comes to your site, they will likely already have in their mind an idea of what information will be available to them when they visit your site and what things they should be able to do on your site, for example, contact you. So the way that you make it clear to those people that those things are available for them is critical to the success of your site. I mean, I'm sure we've all had those experiences where we open up a website and it just seems like a mess and it's overwhelming and it seems like it's going to cost me way too much energy and effort to find what I came for, and so you just leave. That's the exact opposite of what we want websites to be doing. We want people to land there and recognize things they hadn't even thought they wanted to know, but now immediately want to know. So that's discovery and IA, and there are some fundamental outputs from that phase. So when you get to the end of that phase, you should have a sitemap, and a sitemap is simply one of those diagrams. I've got an example. Actually, I'll flip forward to it so I don't have to try and explain it with my words. But one of the diagrams that shows you, okay, what pages exist and what are their relationships to each other. Outputs from the IA phase is also what your navigation structure is going to look like, and we'll dive a bit more into that in a little bit. Wireframes and content planning is the next one, and this is actually a step that a lot of people skip if it's their first project. So content planning being what content's going to sit on what pages, and having a good sense of that before you start to write the content really helps to focus the mind so you don't end up saying the same thing in 7 different places in slightly different ways. And wireframes, I have an example of a wireframe in a moment that I will show you. But wireframes are particularly valuable when it comes to stakeholder management and keeping everyone focused on the user. So when it comes to, you know, marketers and what they output into the world, typically it's visual. You know, everyone experiences marketing in their day-to-day life. Everyone has some level of lived experience that establishes their expectations and their opinions. And good websites are not about subjective opinions, not really. Good websites are about functionality over everything else. A good website helps you find the information you came for and do the thing you came to do above all else. And a lot of websites, a lot of teams who build websites can get distracted by how a website looks and what it says over what it can do for users. And so wireframes strip out brand colors, brand typography, images, actual content. Usually it's placeholder content, because the fundamental purpose of a website is to be functional. And so wireframes ensure that people aren't being distracted by those things, and they're focused on what is the purpose of each individual page. Where do people go next after they visit this page? Where do we want them to get to next? What are the buttons, the call to action buttons that we need on here? Is the hierarchy of information on this page accurate? Are we telling them about the most important thing first? And what I would say is, when it comes to general information hierarchy, being really clear on the priorities and the key user journeys at the start of a project will help you at a sort of universal project level prioritize things like on-page content much easier, because everyone's agreed up front what the most important things are, as opposed to trying to figure it out when it comes to writing copy for the pages. Before I move on to the other phases, any questions, thoughts? Has anyone actually been through the experience of launching a site or been involved in a website project in the past?
Yes, I have been. Very
And
recently,
was it more
actually.
complicated than you expected?
To be fair, we had a lot of help from the developer, but it was quite complicated, to be fair.
Yes, that's the overriding feeling I think we see, is there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. It's a bit like an iceberg.
Yeah,
The end result is there's a lot of hard work that went on underneath. Yeah.
Well, when you see it all come together, though, it's very beautiful. It gives all the effort you put in meaning. So you're happy with what you see, the end result. So it still all comes together anyway.
Yeah, can be quite satisfying at that end point.
Yeah.
Somewhat traumatizing too, but yeah,
True.
there's a lot that goes in. So then once you've kind of locked down, okay, well, these are the pages, this is the rough sense of what content will exist on those pages, and we know the purpose of each page and how users will move between the pages and why, then we can get into page designs. Now, you'll hear the term mobile first bandied around a lot. Mobile first is not necessarily best. That might be surprising to some, but actually, you know, most of us will have gone to a website on a desktop before and discovered a real bare bones, slightly oddly formatted web page that looks like there's not enough content on it. And that might be an example of a poorly designed mobile first website. What we want is actually mobile optimized. So an experience that is excellent in both desktop and mobile. And in our industry, what we typically see is desktop traffic hovers around 80%. So when we build websites, we actually build desktop first. We design desktop first, and then we optimize for mobile. And when we design in desktop, we have an eye on how we expect things will be collapsing down when it comes to mobile designs. I would not suggest trying to design in desktop and mobile formats concurrently, because that just doubles your work to make changes to page designs. So would suggest designing in desktop and then moving on to mobile once that's all signed off. And then content creation happens alongside this. Now, the role of design and content is an interesting one. You can't really have wireframes without some level of a content plan, because what's going to go on the page? And if the wireframes don't have any real indication of what the content is, they're all going to be quite confusing to review, because you don't know which page you're on at any given time. So there's a little bit of a dependency to have some kind of a content plan for each page you're wireframing. But what you don't want either is a content-led website. So those two things really have to work in harmony. And you kind of want whoever's leading the content side to be very synced up with who's working on the design front. And then once you're into the thick of the page designs, you should also be into the thick of the content creation. Typically, we don't put draft content to a great degree onto the page designs to keep the reviews of the designs focusing on the designs as opposed to the nitty-gritty content. And then once page designs and content have been signed off, then we move on to development. So this is where the developers get involved, they write the code. And one thing that's quite important to the success of your website is your ability to use it on a daily basis. So a lot of focus and energy is spent on a website project, focusing on what it's going to look like for your prospects, your clients, and the users on the front end. What is often less thought about and sometimes missed entirely is, how is it going to work on the back end? How are people going to be able to manage the website on a day-to-day basis? And if thought doesn't go into that, you can have a really confusing back end, you can have a really cumbersome back end, and that's going to cost you time week after week after week. So it's not something that should be neglected. You should be thinking about how you're going to set up the back end and how will it be managed. And that need is amplified significantly if you have more than one website, because it's quite likely that if you have more than one website, you need to be able to easily share content and publish content between those sites. And if you have not set up that flow of data well, that's going to cost you time. You may end up spending equal amounts maintaining separate sites, and that can really multiply as your business grows and the number of country sites and in language sites that you need grows. So it's well worth thinking about launch date and future dates as well. Building websites is all about having an eye on launch date and what you're going to be able to realistically launch, as well as having an eye on, as our business scales up and grows, how will the website be set up to scale with it. Testing and bug fixing, incredibly important, but also, not very exciting for me to talk about, but take a measured approach with testing and bug fixing. Make sure you have a clear central place you log issues as you're testing ahead of launch, and making sure that every single one of those bugs is being resolved. And then, of course, launch and post-launch support. One key thing to keep in mind is that if you already have a website and you're launching a new one, you will have to redirect people from the old URLs to the new URLs, and also Google. So just bear that in mind if it's not a fresh site that you're launching, if it's a relaunch. I talked a little bit, I guess I'll pause as well at the end of that slide. Anyone else got anything they want to ask or comment on? No, okay, just shout. Wireframes and page design. So I talked a little bit about the difference. I think the difference is fairly stark here. We do quite pretty wireframes, but sometimes you will have seen them with just like the big X where there's meant to be an image and things like that. Here's an example from our own website where we wireframed the news page and then we actually designed and built it in this way. And what you'll see is there's no brand colors, there's no images, there's no placeholder titles and things like that. And it's not until we move into the design phase that we start to fill in some of that. So it's really focused on what are users on this page for, what are they here to do, and where are they going to go next. I will now move on to fundamentals. So there are some fundamentals that are technical and others that are just more project-based. So hopefully most of you have heard of, CMS platforms and you're familiar with those, but it's worth touching on, because there is a whole spectrum of CMSs out there, and some of them cost a pretty penny. Others are a lot more cost efficient. And what we'd probably encourage you to consider is more expensive isn't always better. So I wouldn't, that whole adage of you get what you pay for isn't necessarily true. You should pay for what you need, is probably what we would say. Lots of firms get a bit excited about technology and what it can do in the future. Think about what you can do today and realistically in the next 2 years, 3 years, and go, what do we actually need to achieve that? So a lot of people, when they do go up the high end of CMSs with all the bells and whistles, don't end up using any of that functionality because they don't have resource to do so, or they aren't set up with the skill set to use that amount of technology. So it's worth thinking about what kind of business you have, your sort of short to medium term aspirations. But it is also worth thinking about the bigger picture, and we'll get to that sort of towards the end of the call today. But choosing a CMS, quite important. I will happily, we consider ourselves to be CMS agnostic, but if you come to us for a website and you have no CMS selected already, we'll probably discuss whether WordPress works for you, because we have found that it is quite a robust platform, and there are some large asset management firms using WordPress to power big multi-country, multi-language, multi-audience web estates in our industry, and doing so very successfully. And WordPress is not, you don't pay for a license for it, so you can spend that money on resource to use it, or marketing spend, or you can reallocate that budget. So the thing about expensive CMSs is you also need specialist skills to be able to ongoing manage and support them. And you have to be careful with things like upgrades and the like. If you haven't already got a site and a domain name, then you'll need to choose one. If you already have a domain name but it's not quite fit for purpose, it's worth making that change before you launch the new site, so that you can manage the redirects together with the old and the new. Generally, we would say make sure that your domain name is meaningful and relevant, so try not to use acronyms that don't have a lot of meaning in the market, and try not to make them too long, because people will type them in and you don't want to ask them to type in too much. You'll also need to choose somewhere to host your website. So that's quite important. Depending on the technology you choose, you should think about specialist providers for that. So when we build on WordPress for clients, we encourage them to use a WordPress specialist host to maximize the speed and performance of the site as a result. And of course, the hosting services available are specific to that CMS. In terms of project and the fundamentals, make sure that there is someone on the hook for owning user experience. The website, sometimes these projects, certain sections of the website get carved up and handed over to certain departments to think about and manage, but you do still need someone that's overseeing the total user experience and how someone will move across the entire site. So make sure that that's quite a clear formal role, and that someone is dedicated to making sure that everything fits together in a really coherent, cohesive way.
And Tabra, I'd add to that, because I think we've done some reviews lately at quite large firms, and one of the things that we constantly find is that lack of UX ownership, which is what you're talking about, but also recognizing that it's quite a formal discipline. And you're not really a UX person unless you are, a trained UX person. So, people just having a view about how a form should be laid out or how pages should be laid out is great. But really, that's where you want specialist UX skills to come in and apply their craft to that overall journey and experience. Otherwise, as you've said, it gets fragmented and it becomes subjective. So going back to that, the website, okay, imagery, fine, there's a bit of subjectivity there, but the rest of it, we want to be as objective as possible about how the site works and how it answers what people are looking for.
And I think it's probably worth, thanks Andrew, it's probably worth mentioning as well, there is best practice. There are wrong things that you can do in UX that will significantly obstruct your users from finding what they need to find. And I've got an example for you. there is a industry website out there that when you the disclaimer pops up, the attestation, I am who I say I am, and then I agree or I disagree. One firm has put the I agree button on the left and the I disagree on the right. And the amount of times that I've gone and clicked I disagree with that statement because they put it on the right, that's a governing UX principle. You put your primary button, the one you want people to click, on the bottom right of your pop-ups. So it's not that subjective. There is lots of research. There's a whole UX industry of research out there. It's, you know, best practice sometimes can be debated, but most of the time it is actually pretty black and white what you should be doing. Another example is primary navigation. So when you land on a website and you see the labels at the top that introduce to you what you can navigate to, far too many of websites in our industry have more than 5 options. And that's the paradox of choice. You know, the more choice made available to you, the less likely you are to make a decision. And so that's a sort of another fundamental and top tip is, you know, be quite disciplined. People in your organizations will push you to have more than 5 labels there. And, you know, that's the role that we play in the projects that we run, is we have to kind of, you know, politely but firmly encourage people to prioritize, because a lot of these decisions come to firms not feeling comfortable with prioritizing one thing over another. You know, other examples are when you're deciding what to call things on your website, you know, you might have a particular brand name for your insights. You might have a newsletter that has its own name when you share your insights. And you might want to call the section of your website that brand name. But that's only really talking to your current clients that are signed up to your newsletter, which is unlikely to be the vast majority of your users. So by choosing a brand name over a functional description of what they will find when they navigate there, you're potentially confusing or alienating a large portion of your visitors, including prospective clients. So these are the things that, you know, we encourage our clients to think about is, you know, you need to think about we have a rule in UX design for the 80%, not the 20%. And realistically, there's probably no more than 20% of your visitors coming to your website already signed up to your newsletter. And if they're already signed up to your newsletter, they're probably not trying to navigate to your insights because they get them to their inbox. So, you know, be quite literal with your labels as much as you can be. Other project fundamentals is who's going to be responsible for various deliverables. Do you have a dedicated person to be writing your copy? Because trying to do that across a lot of people off the side of their desk is going to be very challenging. And copy is an area where a lot of firms think they can manage until they get into the thick of how many pages are going to exist, how much copy they need to write, and how thin the inputs can be, depending on, you know, the type of firm that you're working with. Who's going to do the design, the wireframing, who's going to source the imagery, which is highly subjective. Imagery and choosing which imagery to appear on your site is incredibly important. It gives a look and a feel immediately to your site. And we find it is actually one of the most time-consuming decisions that clients need to make in projects like this. Who's going to build the site? Who's going to populate it? And populating content, quite time-consuming, and you need to have a good sense of what pages exist and where everything goes. You should be quite structured about how you name and save things. Who's going to be involved in the sign-offs? It's never good to get to the point of saying, well, I think we're done, and then not being sure if the right people have seen it and signed it off, and who needs to sign it off, and trying to get time in diaries, and then you've lost 2 weeks or maybe 3 because it was around summer and people are on leave and things like that. So being quite regimented and clear about who's going to be signing off which bits, and getting those diaries in, getting those meetings in diaries sooner rather than later to keep things moving. And then another one is who's going to comply the site. You know, have you got in-house compliance that are going to take care of that? Do you need help with that too? And another overlooked element is who's going to support the site. So we talked already about the websites should be moving and growing with your business. So you shouldn't launch the site and leave it alone. It does look dated when you don't touch your site and keep it up to date, particularly if you're not regularly publishing content. So just worth flagging from a content perspective and a development perspective, you should be prepared to be supported. what happens if the website goes down? Do you have someone on hand that you can speak to? Sometimes that will be an issue that your website host can help you with, but also plenty of times it's not. So having support in place is quite critical. Anything you'd add, Andrew, into that list, or any other anecdotes you want to share?
No, just I don't know if we've got this later on. Just the bigger picture, I suppose, that your website exists inside, a larger technology stack, right? So you've got your email, maybe your marketing automation, you've got your social, you've got your CRM. Typically when we start a website project, we want to understand that complete ecosystem, if you like, because it's important how that stuff all fits together. So that's the only thing I would say is, if looking at a website, make sure that you're looking at the complete sort of process by which you communicate to people, bring them through your website, store that data in your CRM, and then obviously there's other things like infrastructure and hosting that we've already talked about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we do have a slide on that, so we can dive into that a little bit more if people are interested. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about information architecture. I've already mentioned that, we think it is a pretty critical indicator of whether or not a website will be successful. And I've stolen this definition from a US government website, but governments are quite good at this type of thing because they have to be. And actually the UK government websites are quite strong in information architecture too. Information architecture, I will read out verbatim. It was a good definition, so it deserves being read out verbatim. Information architecture focuses on organizing, structuring, and labeling content in an effective and sustainable way. The goal is to help users find information and complete tasks. To do this, you need to understand how the pieces fit together to create the larger picture and how items relate to each other within the system. So it comes back to that holistic ownership of website UX as well, doesn't it? Because, if you establish a system, you then need to fulfill that system. So it all needs to make sense, both in isolation, different sections and pages of the site, but also as a whole. We've all been on horrifically complicated websites, and we've looked at the breadcrumbs, the trail of pages that led you to that page, and gone, I don't know how I got here, and I don't know what all those pages were, and how do I get back? It should be quite clear and logical. That is the fundamentals of IA. And so what we see, people sort of underperforming or underwhelming on IA is the labels are confusing. There are too many labels. There are too many pages. Typically when we see sitemaps, and if I click forward to the next slide, here's a bit of a snippet of one, but you don't want a deep sitemap. That is a rabbit warren of pages that people find it hard to move between and in and out of. You want as few layers as possible in your site. If you can do it in one page, do it in one page. And also if you don't have enough content to establish a page, don't have an empty page with one paragraph on it. That's not helpful. That's not fulfilling the promise that you set the user up for. So information architecture is incredibly important. And as I've mentioned, a number of outputs happen in this phase. So web estate architecture is really only relevant for if you have more than one website. But if you do, it's incredibly important to think about how those websites will interact with each other, how users may or may not move between them, and how content will be published to them. So how many sites, what's their relationship to each other? A sitemap, so you can see on the right-hand side here, a snippet of one. That's not a complete sitemap. It wouldn't all fit. It wouldn't be meaningful if I tried to include it all. But there are pages that you might not think about immediately on a sitemap, things like a 404 page. So if someone goes to the incorrect URL for your domain, do you have a good experience for them to land on? And if someone uses your search bar, what do your search results look like? Those sorts of things. And then your navigation menu. So here's a generic example, but that top layer is the primary navigation layer. And as I've mentioned, 5 or less, that's the target, ideally less. And then you can see for these two, they might be quite transactional, straight through links, so they might not have any secondary navigation underneath them. But for something like about or your funds menu, you might break that down further. to give people a sense of what content is available for them to navigate to. Navigation menus aren't just about, listing pages. They're also about educating users quite quickly when they arrive on what content you have available for them to browse. Typically, you will introduce certain content into your homepage. If it's a first-time user, they're probably going to scroll down and get to know your company that way to begin with. But if it's someone who knows you and is looking for something in particular, they're probably going to go to your navigation menu. So having clear labels and a strong structure is really crucial to getting people to what they came for. Another output is user journeys. So typically what we do during the IA phase is we run workshops and we get everyone thinking about, okay, well, what information are people coming for? What tasks do they need to complete? And from there, big or small, we end up with a list of key user journeys. So, an example might be finding a fact sheet for a fund. And so we help people be really clear on what the priorities are. That usually is one. And then we help them validate decisions around sitemaps and navigation menus by actually mapping how someone would get to a fact sheet from Google or from LinkedIn when they see you on LinkedIn. And then what are the touch points to get there? How many clicks, how many pages will they touch before they arrive at the fact sheet? So that's a really valuable way to test your decisions and make sure that you've prioritized the things you said were a priority. Just pausing now in case anyone's got any questions. Otherwise, I'll continue on with the do's and don'ts. We're heading to the end now. You can see I've only got 2 slides left. My do's and don'ts here are kind of zoom in and zoom out. You'll hear me talk about some UX specifics in here, but also some project high-level management stuff as well. So we would encourage you to plan the project start to finish, week by week, before you get going. Have a clear sense of all the phases and when you're planning to hit certain milestones and therefore sign-off points before you get started. So you can be confident that the timeline you're working to is going to be accurate. And in our experiences, the website projects, they often, toss up decisions and questions that people maybe have never examined as a business or haven't examined for a couple of years. And that means that once those cans of worms are open, it can take a while to sort through them and actually arrive at the decision, which can eat into your project time. So we typically recommend that you internally advertise a slightly longer timeline than what you're actually working to, so you have a little bit of contingency up your sleeve. We've talked about clear responsibilities. We've talked about clear requirements and assumptions around scope and things like that. Follow best practice wherever possible. And that really, I'm really talking about UX and UI here. There is best practice, established best practice. Sometimes there is debate about certain things, but honestly, there's an absolute mountain of content about this stuff out there. You can just Google, should I put my button on the right or the left of my pop-up? And you will find articles about that very thing. Do take inspiration from other websites, right? That's the art of creative. You should absolutely feel inspired, but also overlap that with best practice to make sure what you're inspired by is also following best practice. And we've talked about already the importance of keeping things simple for the user on the front end. And when I say, be disciplined when it comes to keeping things simple, I mean also force others to be disciplined in prioritizing what makes the cut and what doesn't. At the end of the day, on a web page, there is a top, a middle, and a bottom, and not everything can live at the top. So, it's hard, but things like once upon a time, and there are still some around, a big moving carousel on the homepage was once a stakeholder compromise. We can't decide what should live at the top of the web page, so we're just going to have something that keeps running and that no one pays attention to because they think it's just marketing. That's not good practice. That's not going to get people listening to what you have to say and sitting up and taking notice. That's people glazing over and never really having any impact. So those are examples of kind of ubiquitous understood experiences that are just not strong. And don't, as I've already mentioned several times, don't underestimate the size of a project like this. Even if you have a small business and you think it's going to be the smallest site ever, there is still a lot of moving parts, even if the scale is relatively small. Don't copy someone else's website. And, you know, we do sometimes see people, well, why can't we just copy that one? If you spend all your time in all your sales and marketing efforts differentiating your business from other businesses, copying someone else's website is not going to help you do that. And you're more than likely, you know, it likely won't be fit for purpose. Every business to some degree is unique. So that's not a great idea, but also you could be copying their mistakes, you know, unless you've got a UX specialist reviewing every single thing on that website. It's quite likely that you'll be making similar mistakes that they've made in copying that. Find a way to incorporate best practice, but also get creative and express, you know, the unique voice and identity that your brand has on your site. And then some more little UX tips. Don't put text over images wherever you can avoid it. And the reason I say that is text over image, you have to get the perfect image and the perfect color of text and outline of text and size of text. And then you can't control where the text sits on the image because everyone has different screen widths. So it's just much safer for you to not put images behind your text if you can. And also there's a really important element to website building that we term accessibility, which is all about making websites accessible to everyone, including those with impairments such as visual impairments. And text over image is notoriously bad for people who are visually impaired. So that's another consideration. Also, don't upload text inside the image. It's very important that your text is actually live and in the code, as opposed to you've uploaded an image with text in it. If you do that, if you upload an image with text inside it, what you're doing is you're not allowing a web page to do its job, which is to adapt to the size of your device. You're also not allowing Google to read that text because it sees it as an image. And then you're also not helping people who have visual impairments read that text either. So that's another important one. Don't send people to read PDFs if you can help it. Fun literature is probably an exception. But if you have a blog or an insight or something like that, put it on a web page. Let people enjoy the experience of reading it in a web page, being able to copy and paste text, let it resize with the size of their device, and also navigate to and from that page. As soon as someone's in a PDF, they're off your website. You've kind of lost them in terms of getting them engaged and deeper in your content. Lots of people like using capitals everywhere, but capitals are harder to read. This is another sort of UX. It's not really up for debate. Capitals are harder to read, so don't use them if you can avoid it. Lots of brand style guides include headings in capitals, and so, you know, just like colors, some colors don't render well on web. Capital letters don't help the reader, so would suggest avoiding those. Do not forget to add your analytics tag. It is very sad if you get a couple of weeks or goodness months before realizing that you haven't been tracking how many people are coming and how long they're staying and how many pages they're visiting and what's the most popular page. And all of a sudden you want to report on those things and you've forgotten to add the tag. And I would add another tidbit is add the tag, don't add it directly to the site, add it into a tag container. You know, Google Tag Manager is a free tool that Google offers, which basically means your developer puts kind of like, I don't have a better analogy, a handbag, puts a handbag on the web pages, and you can kind of take things in and out of the handbag without having to bother your developers. So, you know, basically you don't have to tap the devs on the shoulder every time you want to add or remove a tag or update anything. You can just go to the handbag. I'll come up with a better metaphor for that. And then don't skip testing. You don't want to launch your beautiful new website and have people ending up with broken experiences left, right, and center. It's really important. And then there is more to consider, as Andrew mentioned, which is things like how you select a CMS, how you select a host for your site. How does your website, either at launch or in the future, integrate with your CRM, your email and marketing automation platform, and things like that. Don't forget to set up your analytics. And then also you might have a baseline analytics, but then go a bit more sophisticated. You know, baseline analytics is going to help you understand how many people are arriving, what pages they hit, how long they spend, but it's not going to help you track how many fact sheets are being downloaded and, you know, which were the top fact sheets that were downloaded. That takes some custom tagging. So it's worth having an eye on that. And, you know, even if you can't manage it at launch, you know, work on it after launch. And then, as we talked about, multi-site content publishing is quite important. And also thinking about that back-end setup that we talked about. How is that going to make your life easy when, you know, monthly fun literature needs to be updated on the site? I know that was a massively big lot of content to sort of power through in a short 50 minutes, but I hope that was useful. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi, Deborah. Thanks for that. It was very helpful. I just had a question on the kind of user experience. Is that something that you would look into personally, or would you look for kind of an expert to do that and employ someone externally?
We would recommend using qualified UX expert for that type of work. It's just a lot of desktop research to even try to get some of the fundamentals bedded down. So it's much quicker and easier to get a UX expert. And really those UX concepts should be applied in the form of a wireframe and a page design. So you will have someone creating those page designs. So ideally that's a digital designer with UX knowledge.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Just to add a couple of things, although we've made the topic quite big already. I think just when you look at that time scale, I think one of the things we draw out for clients is how little of it is the actual development of the website, because actually developing a website is not really the big thing. That's, you know, we can do that. You can choose a CMS, get someone to build it. That's not the hard part. It's all of the work that comes before that, so that they know what they're going to build. So that's a thing. We've talked about user experience, but I think one of the other things that we look at is, as Tabra's touched on, that publishing experience. Like, you don't want to create something and think about all those back end processes that is just really difficult for your team or you to maintain the website. So it's quite important to, you know, put work into saying, can we make it really easy for people to publish great content and put charts and, you know, publish their events and webinars on the website? Because the harder you make that, the less likely people are to, you know, keep publishing great content on the website. So there's something there about the publishing experience and the processes that lead up to that. Well, I think that's probably all from our end. I mean, anyone, I mean, Stuart, you may say, anyone's very welcome to drop us a line outside of this if you've got specific questions, you want any pointers, very, very welcome to. We'll happily do our best to answer.
Thanks, Andrew. Thank you, Tabra. That was very insightful. We've just done a website, which I spoke to you before we did it.
I was going to say, I hope we weren't doing a list of don't do this.
Exactly. But no, very useful.
Website's a living thing.
Exactly. So thanks once again. Thanks for everyone who's attended. This has been recorded for the benefit of those who couldn't attend. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Once again, Andrew, Tabra, thank you for your time, and goodbye, everyone.
Thanks for having us, and nice to meet you all.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.